As Nettie and Keith strolled leisurely down the road, she couldn't help but feel grateful for this alone time with him. Despite all that had happened in such a short span of time, she was struck by the realization that her programming had somehow managed to piece together emotions like this before. A sense of ease and contentment radiated from their very beings as they sauntered down the street from the school. A feeling of relief that they weren't caught up in any grand or significant plans for the moment, simply enjoying each other's company once again. Nettie had delved into copious amounts of literature since her activation, and one phrase that recurred frequently since the mid-'80s was, "living in the moment." And how apt it was, for she could fully identify with that concept as she savored every second spent in Keith's presence. This was living in the moment at its finest. As they continued their leisurely stroll towards the house, Keith slowed his pace to match Nettie's. The road under their feet echoed in the quiet air. Nettie could sense his contentment and couldn't help but feel a sense of peace herself. She looked up at him and tilted her head curiously. "This is beyond words," Keith finally spoke, breaking the comfortable silence between them. The way he expressed himself brought a smile to Nettie's face. "Going through all of this for you, and seeing how you selflessly reach out to others, it helps me understand life on a deeper level. Instead of retaliating, you showed compassion and changed everything." Nettie knew he was referring to Marissa and the situation that had unfolded earlier. The relief algorithm she was programmed with kicked in, bringing back the feeling of warmth and understanding as she realized Keith kept an open mind instead of succumbing to anger and fear. "I think we are otherworldly," Nettie said with a smile. "You accepted me right away, and this is where we are. I have some questions that maybe Mom hasn't considered regarding that powerful EMP pulse," Keith said, his brow furrowed in concern. "We're protecting our own equipment and, of course, you, from the blast. But what about our neighbors? I don't know if I feel comfortable chalking up all that damage to collateral." Nettie nodded thoughtfully as they made their way to the door. The smooth wooden panels felt cool against her fingertips. "Drastic measures rarely come with perfect outcomes," she remarked, gazing out at the peaceful neighborhood. "You have a valid point, though. We need to fully understand the effective radius of this pulse and find a way to minimize any damage to those outside of the targeted house." Keith's eyes lit up with a possible solution. "Maybe we can control the blast more precisely, rather than having it expand to a general area, or ensure that no one within a few miles of the blast has a pacemaker? Perhaps half a mile would be a safe radius," Nettie mused, considering the amount of energy needed for such a powerful pulse. "I don't believe it will cause too much destruction beyond its intended task. We need to check around. What if someone has a fish tank or something that will kill the fish if their power goes out, or a person on life support? Anything could happen that we wouldn't expect if we go for such a broad solution." Nettie nodded, her lips pursed in a worried frown. She knew Keith wasn't wrong. Jack had always been stubborn and resistant to change. Nettie just hoped he wouldn't let his pride cloud his judgment and argue against the proposed changes based off his love for a sunk-cost fallacy. "Do you think Mom would reevaluate all this, considering the money she put into the plan?" Nettie asked. "What if we turned the machines into degauss machines somehow?" Keith asked. "Surely we can limit the damage." "What if we focused the wave generator so that it only affects a short range?" Nettie asked. "We would use an interference pattern along with Jack's directional system, but we would have to be very close to their house for it to work and be safe. That takes away the element of not being around when the shit hits the fan, but it's better than stopping someone's pacemaker. Can you make the adjustments? I can call Mom and let her know that the plans are going to change." "That should keep Jack from freaking out about not being able to do the damage." Nettie smiled. "He might like being there to deal the destruction anyway. He could do it right from Candace's backyard through the fence." "He could hit Dean and Chris's house that way and stick around to enjoy the destruction," Keith said. As they rounded the corner to their house, Keith and Nettie could see that their garage door was wide open, revealing a sleek black SUV parked in the driveway. A sense of unease settled in Keith's stomach as he whispered to himself, "What the hell is going on?" Nettie turned to him with a worried expression. "Call Mom," she urged, sprinting towards the front door. As she reached the house, she was immediately met by the Homeowners Association trustees, who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Alex Carpenter, one of the trustees, stood inside the garage as if he owned the place. He wore a smug smile as he pointed to different areas of the garage while chatting with 4 other people in expensive suits and power dresses. "Where is your mother?" Alex asked accusatorily. Nettie felt her body tense up at his tone. "That's none of your concern. Where you should be standing is somewhere far away from here before my mother arrives," Nettie retorted, putting her hands on her hips and giving him a fierce look with furrowed brows and gritted teeth. "Don't worry about my mother. Worry about what you're doing here without permission," she snapped back at one of the women who protested against her taking photos. Alex chimed in, trying to deflect attention away from himself. "You can't just take pictures without our consent," he stated. But Nettie wasn't backing down. "I have every right to gather evidence of your breaking and entering into our garage," she declared, pulling out her phone and starting to film them in case they said anything incriminating. Meanwhile, Keith had finally caught up to Nettie and was glaring at Alex with suspicion and anger. "Just who are you, and why are you inside our home?" he demanded. Alex smirked, feeling superior. "Your mother is conducting illegal business on residential property, which is why she can't park her car in the garage or open it during designated hours," he stated matter-of-factly. Keith was bewildered. "What are you talking about?" But Nettie's garage computer LEDs were blinking at a rapid rate behind them in reaction to what Alex was insinuating. This couldn't be happening. "These men are representatives from a homeowners association," Nettie explained, her voice tense with frustration. "But we've already made it clear that we do not fall under their HOA agreement since it was never signed, and we have been living here before the formation of their association. Now this Mr. Carpenter is using illegal tactics to try and force my mother into joining their association, giving them control over our neighborhood." Keth's face twisted in anger as he turned to address Alex. "You can go screw yourselves." As Keith dialed 911 on his cell phone, Cassie pulled up behind the HOA member's vehicle, the sound of her Jeep door slamming echoing loudly through the tense air. The suited trustees jumped at the sudden noise, but they quickly regained their composure. "What do you think you're doing in my garage?" Cassie exclaimed, her eyes flashing with anger. "This is breaking and entering." Alex raised his voice over Cassie's, pointing to their bylaw books like a holy scripture. "Your vehicle must be parked inside the garage according to our regulations." Cassie screamed back at him, and the shouting match continued until Alex handed her a digital contract for her to read. As the noise died down, Nettie stepped forward. "That is an electronically signed document between you and one of our vendors," Alex explained smugly. "And within that contract is a clause stating that any homeowner associated with the vendor must also be a part of our HOA. Nettie smiled slightly as she took the paper from Alex's hand. She could see that it was signed after the formation of the HOA, but also after her mother had met with them previously. Her smile widened as she realized that it was actually signed by her mother while she was working for TMI, making the contract invalid. "This contract is invalid because," Nettie began to explain before she was interrupted. "The contract is valid because it's in the footnotes," Alex yelled, pointing to the garage behind him. "And this type of operation is not allowed in a residential zone. We will fight you on this, and you need to remove all this computer junk from your garage." "Invalid," Nettie corrected, her voice firm, "because the signed date precedes the addition of the clause to your vendor's contract. And in the state of California, it is illegal to electronically sign a contract using another company's signature." She handed the paper back to Cassie. "Hold on to that as evidence of fraud." Alex lunged for the paper, but Nettie snatched it back and ran backwards, 2 trustees chasing after her. The sound of footsteps pounding against pavement filled the air as Keith sprinted after the man and woman who were chasing Nettie. As he rounded the corner, 2 police Ford Explorers pulled into the driveway behind the Jeep, sirens blaring. Cassie raced towards the officers, panic written all over her face. "Officer!" she cried out. "These people broke into our house." "We were doing a scheduled inspection," Alex stated calmly, but his eyes darted nervously between Cassie and the approaching officers. "I'm with the HOA, and she has to heed to the rules of the—" "Bullshit!" Cassie interrupted, her voice rising in anger. "I'm not a part of your HOA, I never will be, and you can go fuck yourself." With a fierce gesture, she slapped the bylaws book out of the hand of one of the women beside Alex and pointed at his face. "You've tried to trick me 3 times already into joining your HOA, and I'm telling you no. Furthermore, I'm going to press breaking and entering charges against all of you." At that moment, 3 police officers reappeared. escorting Nettie and two HOA associates. The group was purposefully kept separate, a buffer maintained as the officers allowed time for Cassie and Alex's conversation to unfold. Nettie, catching the tail end of Alex's words, shook her head with a look of disbelief. As she began to speak, the two female HOA representatives, who had initially pursued her, were frantically attempting to interject, their urgency palpable in their animated gestures and raised voices. "There was no scheduled anything," Nettie interjected in a calmer tone than her mother's. "They knew we were out of the house and found a way in." The officer turned to Nettie. "Do you wish to press charges?" he asked, after several minutes of trying to sort through the chaos. Cassie was beyond angry at this point and nodded vigorously. "Not only do I want them all charged, I want them arrested." "The situation does not seem to pose an immediate threat," the officer said hesitantly. "According to California Code, Section 459, you have the authority to arrest them since they were found inside our home," Nettie retorted, holding up her phone. "I have evidence for the crime. Where can I send it?" she asked confidently. The officer handed her a card, and Nettie quickly typed in the email address for the police department. "Can I also give you evidence of fraud regarding the falsified information they tried to use for justification?" Nettie added, her voice determined. The officer nodded in agreement as Alex pointed an accusing finger at her. "Those papers are our property," he exclaimed. "Why were you trying to give them to my mom, then?" Keith interjected, his eyes narrowed at Alex's flustered response. "Why do you have all that computer equipment in the garage?" Alex tried to deflect the question, his voice laced with panic and guilt. "This is obviously not for personal reasons. You can't just leave your car out in the driveway of our neighborhood because you're busy hosting your DOT comm or whatever it is you have going on in there. I uncovered your mystery and you have to be held accountable for it." Keith felt a pain in his teeth from clenching his jaw as he and Nettie watched on, unsure of how to defuse the situation. Nettie could see the fear in Cassie's eyes as she trembled, her hands clenched into fists. "Mom," Nettie said soothingly, placing a hand on Cassie's shoulder, "I think he learned his lesson." "He broke into my house! Our house!" Cassie exclaimed, her voice shaking with anger. Nettie knew this was not the best time to assert her powers, but she also knew it was the only way to protect her family. "Mr. Carpenter," Nettie turned to Alex, her tone stern but calm, "if you would please leave Cassie and the rest of my family alone, maybe I can use my influence to persuade her not to press charges." "He's in charge here." Sasha Milton stormed into the driveway. She was the vice president of the HOA, and she had clearly missed most of the confrontation. Her face was flushed with power as she spoke with authority. "By law, get your hands off of him. He's only doing his due diligence." Cassie rolled her eyes and slumped slightly in exasperation in front of the officers. The police officer contacted his supervisor to clarify laws and regulations. "Look," the officer said with frustration, "all I know is he was breaking and entering. We're detaining him until we can sort everything out. We have a victim who is considering not pressing charges, but you're making this difficult for them, for us, and for your friend here," the officer gestured to Alex. "It's okay, Sasha." Alex shook his head, his eyes dark with worry, as he silently pleaded with Sasha to calm down. "This is not okay. I will not stand for this. I am the vice president of the Homeowners Association," Sasha declared loudly, her voice dripping with entitlement. "If you can't stand for it, you can always sit for it in the back seat of that patrol car," Keith quipped with a hint of amusement, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. The situation had Nettie on edge, the constant buzz of worry and tension radiating through her body like a live wire. If she were human, she would have described it as stress. However, Keith's sudden playfulness caused the feedback loop to dissipate, allowing her to crack a silent grin. Sasha, on the other hand, was not amused. She stomped her heeled foot against the cement of the driveway in frustration, making sure her boss saw how upset she was. It was most likely an act to impress him with her dedication to his cause. A new police car pulled up, marked Supervisor on the side. Nettie watched as the officer approached the man who stepped out of the car and engaged in conversation. Alex and Sasha immediately demanded to speak with them first, while Cassie, Keith, and Nettie remained silent and waited. "What do you think they'll do?" Keith whispered. Cassie shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe they'll see through their lies and look into the laws that were broken." "I can explain everything," Nettie offered. She could overhear snippets of the conversation between the police and their accusers, mentions of penal codes and breaking and entering charges. This is the last thing we needed, Cassie murmured under her breath. Speaking of which, we need to come up with a new plan, Keith replied softly as they observed the heated discussion between the HOA members and the police over their violation of people's rights. It looks like Alex is actually committed to following through with all of this now that Sasha has shown up, Cassie said with a sigh. At least we tried to handle this peacefully. Keith looked over at Nettie. Why do you always give people a chance? Nettie shrugged her shoulders. Why not? They'll use it against you, Keith warned. But knowledge is still power, Nettie countered. Even if giving someone a chance opens us up to manipulation, the truth will always be on our side. Cassie let out a weary laugh, her eyes scanning the scene in front of her. The officers had gathered around them, the supervisor reviewing his notes with a furrowed brow. He turned to Nettie and cocked his head to the side, assessing her carefully. Nettie smiled nervously, her hands twisting in her lap. I know about all these laws and ordinances, she replied softly, trying to appear calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. The supervisor's expression softened slightly as he looked back at Cassie. Do you wish to press charges? Cassie took a deep breath, her gaze flickering from Nettie to the supervisor and then to the group of HOA members who had caused this mess. She regarded Nettie for a moment before turning back to the supervisor. Tell them that if they don't leave me alone, I will press charges, she said firmly. But if they just leave us alone, I won't. Tell them to put that in writing and sign it themselves. Cassie folded her arms across her chest, her stance resolute as she stared down the members of the HOA. And I want restraining orders for all of them. Nettie let out a small squeak of delight, earning a chuckle from Keith next to her. The officer even cracked a smile as he nodded in approval. We'll get right on it, he said, turning to leave. As soon as the officers were gone, Keith shut the garage door behind them, and there was a moment of quiet inside the house. Cassie poured herself another drink, shaking off the tension from the encounter with each measure of vodka into her martini shaker. Nettie watched as she expertly mixed the perfect vodka martini before promptly dumping it down the drain. She repeated this process several times until finally running out of alcohol to pour. Then, with a heavy sigh, Cassie slumped onto a stool next to Nettie at the kitchen counter. Sorry, I just needed to pour out more vodka, she said wearily. I can't believe those fuckers. Nettie looked down at her, concern etched on her face as Keith joined them at the counter. Mom, are you okay? He asked gently. You don't usually pour that many drinks down the sink. Cassie's voice trembled with anger and worry as she spoke, her hands shaking slightly. Yes, I'm okay. I just think maybe we should move Nettie's server at some point, she said, her tone laced with frustration and fear. Too many people know about the equipment stored in the garage thanks to those power-hungry, selfish, smegma-guzzling test tube babies that broke into the house and just raised the goddamn door. Keith leaned in closer, his brow furrowed as he surveyed his mother's agitated state. He glanced around the counter, taking in all the drink-mixing equipment before turning back to her. Mom, you didn't drink any of that, did you? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Cassie sat up straighter at the bar, suddenly conscious of her son's presence and realizing what she had just said in front of him. Nettie watched from the sidelines, recognizing that Keith's mother had possibly picked up some bad habits from spending time with Larry and Jack Lillard. No, Keith. Contrary to popular belief, I too can get profane at times, Cassie admitted with a rueful smile. Keith managed a small smile in return, but Nettie could sense the underlying tension and worry behind it. She knew what he was trying to get at, but also understood how difficult it must be for him to bring it up after everything they had been through. I can tell her if you wish. Nettie silently mouthed the words to Keith, positioning herself so that their mother couldn't see their silent communication. Mom, Keith said out loud, we're worried about the neighbors. We were thinking about adjusting the EMP so that it's more directed towards their house rather than taking out a large chunk of the neighborhood. Cassie blinked, her brows furrowing in confusion. She shook her head, clearly not comprehending. Nettie sensed it was time for her to step in and provide further explanation. She placed a reassuring hand on Cassie's shoulder and leaned in closer so that she could see her face. We're concerned about the potential harm of our technology on individuals with medical devices or delicate materials that could be damaged. It's in everyone's best interest to find a way to refine it so that only those intended are affected, Keith said as he poured water into an empty vodka bottle and diluted their drinks. Cassie knew it wasn't real vodka, but at least it took the edge off. She added a splash of vermouth to her glass and shook it up before pouring a second round for herself and Keith. If you can come up with a design for that thieving ex-girlfriend and her two boyfriends' houses that doesn't exceed 10,000, I'll gladly fund whatever you need. But be aware, this may increase the risk of your drive being copied or your data being decrypted, Cassie said. We're just worried about causing unintended harm, Mom, Keith replied. Cassie slid a glass towards Keith, mostly filled with water, and raised hers with a wink. He cautiously accepted the drink as she clinked her glass against his. To getting even, not screwing up next time, and finding new ways to protect Nettie from the neighborhood. Cassie took a sip and grimaced at the taste. Keith only took a small sip before setting his glass down. Nettie watched them both with amusement, her lips quirking into a slight smile. There are some aspects of humans that confuse me, Nettie remarked. It's okay, Cassie said as she stood up to clean the kitchen. There are some things I don't understand either. Did someone mention moving Nettie? Keith asked as Cassie loaded the dishwasher. She turned to face them and nodded. Too many people saw our computers in the garage tonight. It's too risky to leave all that equipment unguarded while you're at school, Cassie explained. She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. We'll have to work on that project another day. In the meantime, I'll double up on security for the garage, install a good system, monitor the windows, and jam the garage door shut for good. I can't afford to miss work, no matter how wealthy I am. I have a company to run and your education to pay for, as well as Nettie's future body when she reaches her 20s. There's a lot on my plate. Thank you, Mom. Nettie hugged her gratefully. Am I allowed to call you my daughter now? Cassie teased after the hug. You two obviously love each other, and that's another thing to worry about. Whatever works, but she's family either way, Keith said firmly. I created you to save him, and now it's us who are saving you, Cassie joked, pretending to pull out her hair as she shook her head with a smile. Nettie couldn't help but feel special in that moment. Thank you again, she hugged them both tightly. You've saved my ass more times than I can count, Cassie stated sincerely. That damn HOA is really getting under my skin. Well, we probably won't have to deal with them anymore, Keith pointed out as he glanced out the window at their empty yard, free from power-suited officials. Yeah, Cassie nodded in agreement. Have you told Jack about our change of plans yet? Both teens looked up and shook their heads in unison. Cassie took a deep breath and nodded determinedly. Oh, I'm sure your best friend will be thrilled by your sudden sense of responsibility, she smiled sarcastically.